let me ask you, do you hear my voice? Let me check. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. おはようございます。Is it very soft? Sounds a little soft to me. Okay. How about this way? I mean, I'm not directly talking to the microphone, so it should be soft, but oops. Okay, here you go. Okay. てるのまくん、おはようございます。Chris, hi, how are you doing? Vanessa, good morning. Great. Okay, let me see. So we'll check again the microphone when he's here because he will talk directly. Quite good, I think. I know Chris is from Vancouver. How are you doing? あ、テルヌマくん日本語。はーい。Okay.
誰？
テルヌマくん。テルヌマくん。Everybody here.
Okay.
Please.
I
Ready?
guess so. You put this here. I hope I don't trip. Wait. Arigato. Thank you. Wait. Ugh. Oh gosh.
Maybe too loud.
Okay. Is this too loud?
No?
Okay, I put this here.
Sit.
And restart. Okay. Wow, so much.
You want to put that way?
I don't know how to put. What do you think?
That one.
How should I do it?
iPad.
Don't I usually do that way?
It's okay. Then
I'm
too
sorry.
high.
We've only been doing this for over a year, but anyway, we have no idea what we're doing. It's too high, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I had no idea about yet. Okay, I put it here. Yeah, how is that?
Excellent.
Okay. So, here we are once again. Hello, everyone. As I speak into this microphone in our new format with this nice Audio-Technica microphone. I don't know why I even mentioned that, but anyway. So I forgot one thing I have to do. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Get myself more or less prepared. Uh-oh. I just lost my colleague here. I hope and I'm not sure. Anyway, well, perhaps I do start no matter what. and I hope that you actually can hear me and can see me. That is, if you would like to. So, of course, there's a lot of horrible news, but I'm not going to actually today kind of, what should I say, dwell on the worst part of what's happening all over the world. I will just do a little bit, but this is more about what is absurd to start. And I begin with one little political section with a bit from the New York Times yesterday, which actually disclosed that in February 2018, this was the time of the Trump administration, the president, as the Times mentions, became obsessed with figuring out who apparently was leaking information to the press, and he had the Attorney General Jeff Sessions at the time, that's the Department of Justice of the United States, subpoena records from Apple. That's the company which makes this iPad, among other things. Can you hear me? Okay, good. This is seems to be a lot better than our previous way of doing things. So he had Jeff Sessions subpoena records of communications of prominent Democrats such as Adam Schiff, who was the top Democrat on a committee investigating Trump, and also Eric Swalwell, and both were big critics of Trump. Now, also, he had the Department of Justice investigate members of their families, including at least one child. As it's written by the Times, the government seized the records of at least a dozen people. This is now. Nothing came of that investigation, and Sessions dropped it. But then, of course, he was out, and Barr came in, became Attorney General in February of 2019, and he revived. I can't talk. He revived those investigations, moving personnel from the Justice Department around to ramp up, as the Times mentions, the inquiry. Anyway, the Justice Department did not find that Democrats they were investigating were connected with anything terrible, I would say. But they also subpoenaed records from journalists from the Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, etc., to find people who are so-called leaking secrets. Of course, this came at a time when, in fact, Republicans were refusing to participate in the inquiry, and were refusing to testify themselves. That's okay. So, what does this mean? It just means that you had president and administration which secretly investigated members of Congress who were part of the opposing party, in other words, Democrats, and who were investigating the president. Somehow, that sounds a bit totalitarian, doesn't it? Has that direction. So this is Anyway, another bit of information about, in a certain sense, the dangerous times we are living in. Of course, we have in Belarus this really totalitarian situation. Lukashenko there engaging in mock trials, etc., etc. But even in the United States, this so-called bastion of democracy, we have that tendency just even just a little bit happening of that way. I'm not speaking very well, but I think it is quite cause for concern. Now, we move on to more absurd stuff. Now, this the Texas Attorney General, this is Ken Paxton, who's been in the news very often for all sorts of ridiculous things. He's now being investigated by the State Bar Association. He's accused of filing frivolous lawsuits when he challenged President Biden's victory. Now, of course, he's still at the center of bribery and corruption accusations. Hold it. I always do this, but that's simply because I forget to wake myself up enough before I come here. Okay, I continue. This is actually, I look at this as a bit of good news, of course, because what this could do is actually result in Ken Paxton being barred from the Bar Association. In other words, he wouldn't be able to practice any kind of lawyerly activity. Okay, now you continue with a little bit. I'm going to, and what's happening in the United States now is a lot of discussion about inflation, that we have inflation now. And you say prices jumped 5% in May from the year earlier, and it's stoking a big debate in Washington with some people saying, you see, the stimulus, what it's done, it's caused inflation. It's superheating the economy, and we have to pare everything back and not try to do the wonderful things which the Biden administration has been proposing to do, which is simply repair the infrastructure of the United States, which is falling apart. Okay, now, in the New York Times, this is an article in today's Times. There's a chart. I won't show that chart, but I'll explain it a little bit. So you have a problem that, for instance, the rent of the primary residence has risen quite a lot for many people. Now, on the other hand, if you are not renting, but you have owning your domicile, that's increased maybe a 1.8% according to this only. Now, airline fares have also increased a decent amount, 24% this way. And used cars and trucks has increased huge amount, 29.7%. So you have the rent of the primary residence, which actually has risen a bit. First I read this not quite correctly, because what I've written here is actually sort of a mess. uh, but so you have used cars and trucks have huge increase, and also airline fares have increased a lot, although not to the level that they were before the pandemic. Okay, so why am I talking about this? Because there's all this talk about that inflation, and you have economists. I won't say more about economists, but uh, trying to study whether this indicates some kind of long-term problem or this is just a short-term issue. But just looking at this as a neutral observer who doesn't know anything except has been reading the news, of course. Now, what has been happening as during the pandemic, and especially now as the pandemic wanes and people are still nervous about certain things. So there is, of course, a big run on buying used cars. Now, new cars and trucks have a problem because the semiconductors that power not only new cars but many things that are in great short supply. And of course that is due especially because most of these semiconductors are produced in Taiwan. There's a huge drought in Taiwan, and there still is a very serious issue now with the COVID infections. So production is down, and you don't have enough parts for new cars, and of course you have rising prices of them. And you also have more people, because you cannot buy new cars so well, going to buy used cars. And what does that mean? The price goes up for used cars. Now, this is all, I don't know, it's not even, complicated for kindergarten that way, but somehow it's being presented as this is inflation, which is going to envelop the whole country and be terrible. Okay, what else? People are buying cars, of course, because still basic public transportation is not trusted yet to the extent that it was before. So although you do have in New York City, you do have people who are riding the subways, etc., it's still there is more reliance on personal vehicles rather than on public transportation. Okay. Airline fares have gone up a lot, and that makes perfect sense because they were down to almost nothing during the pandemic when people were not flying and could not fly, in fact. So this is all, I don't understand what this panic about inflation is quite about. Yeah. Restaurant prices are up, as they say, about 4%. That's maybe something, but I hope that what that means is that, in fact, the people who are serving the food, etc., are actually receiving a little more in terms of the, their salaries. Because in the United States, at least, oops, is everything okay? Am I just shrinking? That's the problem? Yeah, I'm trying to go up, but then I'm going down. I'm going up, I'm going down. Okay. Anyway, what was I going to say? That many, as I think I mentioned earlier, although everything sort of becomes a kind of mix in my mind, so I don't know what I said, what I wanted to say, what I will say. But base pay for many servers, waiters, kitchen help in general, outside of tips, was around $2.90 an hour or less. It's crazy. So hopefully that some of this, that small rise in the cost of restaurants, now that actually they're open in many places for people to go, although there's limited seating, which also can explain why perhaps the price is a little higher. But hopefully the people who are actually working in the restaurants are making at least closer to a living wage than they were. It's okay. I go on to one more thing before other stuff, I guess. I just think I'm too sleepy this morning. I didn't. No? I was told I'm not too sleepy. Okay. Then I accept that. Okay. There's a new drug on the market now, Aduhelm. Aduhelm? I don't no idea how to pronounce it. This is the first drug which has been approved for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease in an incredibly long time. I don't even know how long it is, but more than 10 years, of course. But this is a drug which is it's a monthly injection or infusion, as it's written here, again from the New York Times, and that's priced at around $56,000 per year. And it was approved this week by the Food and Drug Administration of the United States, and because of that, 3 advisors resigned. And that is because this drug has been approved, even though there is very weak evidence that it helps patients at all. Now, there's a lot of lobbying for its approval, and of course, there's a lot of desire for something to come onto the market, something that medical science can give to treat Alzheimer's disease, something new, because everything so far has sort of ended in a kind of dead end. That, but unfortunately, the desire is not enough. And I think 2 things are dangerous with the approval of this drug. Although I have to say my mother also suffered from Alzheimer's disease a long time, and it's a terrible thing to watch happening, to deal with as it goes on. It's a terrible tragedy. And you see someone who is brilliant then actually degrade from year to year. But what should I say about this and the drug? That first of all, if it lowers standards for this drug in general, then it's possible to lower standards for other medicines. And it's very important that medicines be proven effective and safe for us. Now, this is in a way, a bad precedent. Then, also, if it turns out not to be effective and to be as expensive as it is, this will actually, obviously, I should say, cause a reaction within the public, which already does not trust what's called big medicine, as in a way. Uh-oh. I don't know if I said something wrong, but once again, I'm quite alone. Anyway, that they will not further, this will further erode the trust that the medical establishment has among the public. So, enough of that. Okay, now what do I want to say? I highlighted 3 bits of absurd news in my introduction. One about how the vaccines make us all magnetic, and that this magnetism is connected with the 5G network, etc., etc. So this is a terrible plot. Okay, but the one thing I want to perhaps sort of recapitulate, this has to do with, I'm sorry, it's just so ridiculous. This is when the President Biden was on the tarmac going to fly to England for the G7 meeting, he encountered cicada, or which is also called a 17-year-old locust. And of course, this is the 17th year, and there's a big infestation of these locusts in many parts of the United States, including the Washington area. Now, the only thing is I need to look at this once again, sorry. I'll see if I have it or if it's been lost. But then there's the QAnon. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so QAnon, that's sites from QAnon, I should say, that's chat groups from QAnon, immediately saw in this a coded message concerning the deep state. Now, there are a couple things. Some people texted that, this proves that, in fact, this is not the real Biden, but this is just a clone who's been cloned by the deep state and is controlled by them. Okay. Another, group of texts circulated that, of course, this is this whole infestation of cicadas is also a plot. And this is because it happens in 17 years, and, as I said, the Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. And I mentioned in my introduction, I said, the English alphabet, of course, not the Greek alphabet, not certain other alphabets, not the Korean alphabet, for instance, or the Russian alphabet, or whatever, as if there's some primary significance to the English alphabet. And immediately I was reminded, this is already several years ago, of a pastor in Texas when talking about immigrants who don't speak English. And they said, and what I remember of this is that this pastor said, these people should speak English like in the Bible. I don't know even if that pastor read from the St. James Version. Probably not. But that was very remarkable. Okay, one more thing about this. I can just keep going on about this ridiculous stuff this week. This is from Vanity Fair. It's a magazine, which I generally don't read, but the headline that just popped up in my email for somehow reason caught my attention. And that is that Republicans are 1 week away from demanding that Anthony Fauci be deported to Wuhan. And it says the conservatives are obsessed with the baseless idea that the veteran immunologist had something to do with the origin of COVID-19. And it says, you know, these basically myths that are propagated all kind of are incredible. But I read this and I thought, wow, that's so interesting, because right now I think Wuhan is in incredibly good shape. Like much of China, it is open. People are actually in the musical world playing concerts for audiences, etc., etc. So can deport him to Wuhan to have a nice time. And that does bring me to the topic of imagination and knowledge, and how ignorance, in a certain way, is the enemy of imagination. But not yet. Because there's really some very, very interesting news. And the first has to do with slime molds. And I do this especially for my partner over there. But it's fantastic, I think, because now the most recent thing, this is, I read in the Smithsonian, this one. Now, slime mold helps astronomers map the universe's dark matter, which is actually fascinating. There's another headline I saw, but I haven't pursued it yet. Certain astronomers believe that the universe is conscious itself. Maybe it has something to do with this. If it's at all interesting, perhaps I'll mention it next week, but we'll see. So anyway, now I'll read a bit about this to you. As the cosmic web is called, is a vast network of interconnected, as they say, filaments made of dark matter and gas that forms the scaffolding, in other words, the underpinning of the entire universe. Now, these filaments can stretch hundreds of millions of light years. They connect galaxies, galaxy clusters, superclusters, etc., etc. But it's very difficult to map because dark matter does not interact with light. And of course, if you can't see it, even by any kind of telescope, let's say, then you can't really map it. Now, researchers at the University of California, Santa Cruz, they sifted through archive data of 37,000 galaxies. It's a lot of galaxies. We're just one. Before charting their positions in the sky. They then used an algorithm which was derived from the behavior of slime molds. Because slime molds, as I mentioned earlier, are fascinating organisms. You don't really know whether a slime mold actually is one organism or several organisms, but they are made, actually they have these kind of tubes, and that enables them to search out food, to map distances, to find the shortest route from one place to another, etc., etc. And they found this to be incredibly useful in actually mapping what they couldn't see through telescopes in the universe. And what I want to do is just show this to you. This is from astronomy.com. Here, wait a second. And no, I did the wrong thing, I think. Sorry. It's not that one. Maybe this. No, this is it. Yeah, I can do that. So it's really quite wonderful. This is part of what was mapped using this algorithm. So this is what we know of about how the universe actually looks. Fascinating, no? You see, so this all comes from the slime mold. Was that okay? You could see all right? Great. Okay. Now from that I move on to more interesting stuff. Of course, just one thing which I think many people already know, of course, and it's been known for a long time, but finally the National Geographic Society, which is a rather important nonprofit organization, has recognized the fact that there are not 4 oceans in the world, but 5. And what they recognized was the Southern Ocean, which goes around Antarctica. And while the other oceans are delimited by land masses, this actually, they found that limit of that ocean is determined by by oceanic currents, so that the actual way the water moves in that ocean is distinct from the Atlantic or the Pacific Oceans that actually border it. It's actually quite interesting, and in fact, you have a different fauna and different flora in this Southern Ocean. So, the Earth has 5 oceans. As I said, many of us actually knew that already, but the National Geographic until just now wasn't convinced. Okay, keep going. No. I want to do all of this. I want to do this because there's a lot of very interesting stuff. And I'm sorry that I spent time with the stuff before that's not actually interesting, although it's ridiculous. Okay, now another thing. It's China has a fusion reactor. It's a tokamak reactor. Now, tokamak actually is a Russian word. And it comes from Tora idalna kamera s magnitnymi katushkami. That's okay. Don't worry what it means. Although it's basically a circular container where you have supported by magnets. You have this plasma running around this way, and what they achieved. It's called the artificial sun in China. That's or H27U. It's operated since 2006, but just now apparently, or at least fairly recently, at least I read about it just now, it actually sustained a plasma reaction for a whole of 101 seconds at the temperature of 120 million degrees Celsius. And you may think that, well, what is that? That's almost nothing. But this is a lot more than any fusion reactor has been able to sustain a plasma reaction until now. So this is actually a small breakthrough in the pursuit for controllable fusion energy that we have. So this is actually, I think, rather important. Now, what else? Okay. And sort of with that, this idea of fusion, there's, at CERN, just recently, a particle was seen switching between matter and antimatter. And let's see if I have a decent photo of that here. Yeah, this is kind of nice. This is not the real thing, but this is sort of an artist's thing. You take your pick which one is matter and which one is antimatter. Okay. But now, why is this interesting? And it's actually really fascinating, I think. Now, matter, of course, and antimatter are essentially the same thing, except one has a negative charge, one has a positive charge. And things are complicated because photons actually are their own antiparticles as well. And other particles can have a weird mixture of two states at the same time, thanks to what is called superposition. This is a bit of quantum mechanics, which I dabble in, but of course, that just means that I read things and understand a little bit. Although at one time in my life I understood a lot more about this. Okay, so that these particles actually oscillate at the same time between being matter, antimatter, matter, anti. Now there's a new particle which is called the charm meson. I don't explain what it is exactly. Well, I should explain perhaps. It's made up of a charm quark and an antiquark. You can figure out what that is, so just look it up on Wikipedia and you'll find out. And its antimatter equivalent consists of a charm antiquark and an up quark. Now, normally they're separate, but at CERN, this is this big collider, super collider in Switzerland, that they found that it can switch between the two, so they can switch like this. Now, why is that very interesting? Because what that actually they found is that this charm meson and the charm anti-meson have slightly different masses. Now, you're waiting for the clarinet, right? And I have different clarinets, and they actually weigh different things. So they have different weights or different masses, we can say, but this is a little different than that. But why is this interesting? Now that means that one actually will travel farther than the other, and that means also that one will decay faster than the other one will decay. And probably that is very significant information as to why the universe, in the very beginning, let's say, the Big Bang, whatever, did not annihilate itself, but actually expanded and so far has turned into what we experience today. Because there's been this controversy over why does the universe actually exist if antimatter and matter will cancel each other out. You have that. But in fact, they find that there is a subtle difference between matter and antimatter. Okay, that's that. No, I continue just a little bit more. Okay, and I go to honeybees. And here I get that. Yeah, this is good. Now, what is interesting, let me go back, about honeybees is they have these hairs on their body which actually seriously reduce friction. And that way, you see, they collect pollen from flowers, so they collect it, but they bend and straighten their abdomens, let's say it so, in other words. They sort of practice yoga, I guess, in a way. Bee yoga. Interesting. Also. But as they do that, there's almost no friction between their bodies and the plant itself. If there were, then there would actually be wear and tear in their bodies, which is not seen. So it turns out that these hairs that they have are grown in a certain way that they reduce friction considerably. And here, I want to just show you, come on, sorry. Yeah, here, this is actually an electron microscopic image of these hairs, and you see it in two ways. This is 50 UM. This is, and this is 10. This is in, can you see it? Yeah? Very, very interesting. Now, this discovery will probably have practical use in actually creating material which has less friction, which is actually smoother than what is so far possible. And this kind of reminds me of two other things. One has to do with butterfly wings. Uh-oh. Butterfly wings. Now those butterfly wings are very interesting because when it rains, it should be that the butterflies, the wings become saturated with water and too heavy, and the butterflies are unable to fly. But that doesn't happen. And it turns out that's because they have a honeycomb structure, that structure is smaller than any kind of water droplet. So the water that actually goes onto the wings immediately sloughs off. So the wings, in a certain way, are always dry, even in a big rainstorm. And that has been used, and I haven't seen it in any kind of a practical way, but when I was flying a lot, I did see this in a little video on one of my flights. That been used can be used as a coating for clothing or for material, etc., to actually prevent staining and prevent water damage. So in this video that I saw, first of all, it was part of a suit, a white suit, and I imagine that it's not, not fake what I saw, but anyway, so someone would spill tomato sauce on it, and it would just wipe off completely this way. Fascinating, and which is very funny. They coated an iPhone with that. Of course, an iPhone has to be an iPhone. It couldn't be another phone, but an iPhone and put it inside of a toilet. Flushed the toilet so the water would go around. Took it out, and the phone was dry and worked perfectly. Very, very interesting. Another thing had to do as what I saw about woodpeckers. And the amount of force that a woodpecker uses in actually pecking at the tree or whatever is something that would immediately turn our brains to mush completely. And the question is, how do they do that? And they found out that there's a mix of both hard and soft tissue, which both protects and then cushions the actual impact of when they're doing that. And that can be used, that information, to create helmets, things which are much more effective than what we have now. I still haven't seen that actually made into any kind of practical invention, but it's interesting. Okay. Last thing. I'm so sorry, but this is Israeli archaeologists, found a whole real 1,000-year-old egg. And they found it in an ancient toilet in Yavne, Israel, as they're doing an excavation. So the egg had been perfectly preserved, had not cracked. It didn't decay or rot particularly, because whatever it was dropped or placed in the toilet. It was sort of encased in this waste material, which created these anaerobic conditions, which preserved it very well. And here I have that, and hopefully I can show. This is the 1,000-year-old egg, and I don't know if I'm showing it correctly or not, if you can see it. Is it right? Yeah? So this is the real 1,000-year-old egg. Okay. Then what happened, of course, is somehow accidentally the egg cracked. But, as they said, probably to find out what was actually inside the egg, you have to crack it anyway to be able to analyze it. So they said it was not terrible that it did break. So I think this is all the stuff that I have. Finally, right? Yeah. And now it's my turn to move on to music itself and to knowledge and imagination. And I started last time to look at, I have this, I think.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Last time, let me put this away, I think, here. And I should say that one reason that I let me put this over here too, perhaps. One reason that I spend time with this kind of stuff that I'm presenting is when I read it, this learning about things like this sparks my imagination, and I hope that it will actually spark your imagination. That's it. Now, going to music, as we're seeing with Nielsen, there are things which I think are very necessary to know in order to actually perform the piece in a convincing, compelling way. They have. And I started last time with the opening and how we move. We're in F major, then we go into D minor, we go into A minor, this way that things are not so simple that way. And then I went on, I think, to the Poco Adagio a little, to speak about that, to show a bit of what's happening there. And of course, earlier I did a lot in Nielsen explaining what I had learned, especially from the people, and especially the Danish clarinetist Jens Schou, and also John Kruse. That's about what Nielsen actually told. This was Schou told his teacher, who has studied with Oxenvad, for instance, that way. So we have a kind of trail from Nielsen through to that. And this is another point, though, that all this information I get by word of mouth, basically, and also by looking at Nielsen's manuscript, which I showed, at least in part, to my live stream audience much earlier. I'm not going to do that again, but which did actually support a bit of what I was told. Now, anyway, what's most important is that this information I received, and again, I don't know quite whether this information is correct or not. Of course, in part it's correct, but I don't know if it's correct as a whole. But that is not important. What is important is the imagination that it inspired. And what should I say? This imagination created an image of this piece which made this piece much more complex and compelling. First of all, what it did is maybe look at it in a way to see, well, what did Nielsen actually write? Because as I had been taught, that this Nielsen sort of wrote this in kind of stream of consciousness or whatever, and of course it had to do with Oxenford being bipolar or schizophrenic or something like that. It's all sort of very like blah blah blah, and this is all okay. But in fact, as I detailed in my earlier live streams, that his compositional process was actually very, very carefully controlled and had a basis in classical music, in a classical sense of structure also. Now, I don't look at that now, but I look at the emotional meaning that I can find once having known about just also the history and what supposedly Nielsen told and what is in the manuscript, and also little statements such as that there are parts of this piece which must sound like Bach. And for that, I will start here. I took the stand away, but I think I'll put it back because I want just to take a little bit. Here, let me do this. And let's see if this will work. And I need to, I have to find what I need, but because it's not something that I know by memory. Although I sort of do, but not really. Nothing of that. No. I use this. What is this? Not only that, I can't put on the right way. And I should preface this by saying when I'm doing all this stuff, I may fall on my face. And I think that's okay in this situation, because people always sort of try to create personas, they call it, and want to keep a particular image of themselves. And if you're a great artist, let's say, and perhaps I am, I don't know, it's not for me to decide. Can you hear me still? Yeah, great. Okay, they want to maintain this fiction of greatness or something. Of course, what immediately always comes to mind, really, is, I should say, the famous photo of Albert Einstein sticking his tongue out. You see, so this is kind of saying that, well, you know, I'm a great scientist, but I'm a person, and the world is much greater than I could ever be. So why am I saying this? It's just that, am I apologizing? Perhaps I am apologizing for the fact that I haven't practiced. Anyway. Okay, so. And I play a terrible reed today, too. But that's sort of par for the course. So, what am I looking for? Oh, gosh. I think I'm going to have to go and look for it and come back. And I apologize. Once again, I was told never to apologize, but I do that so often. It's okay. I'm all right. Is it here? Yep. See, I just didn't put it back where I should have. No, what I wanted to do, I played a minor third too low, or that's actually, which is probably more like one step too low if we look at the Baroque pitch in Leipzig. And do I sit down or do I stand up for this? I don't even know. Well, this is down, so I'll sit down. I'm sorry, I'll stand up. Easier to is it easier to manipulate this music stand or not? I have to see it too. I'm sorry. You see, I apologized again. Okay, so anyway, here goes. And this is a tiny bit of the Bach chaconne. And just this part here, just to, so we have something like a, etc., etc., this way. But this is one thing that Nielsen is saying. These kinds of passages that he writes in his piece should sound sort of like that, this way. Now, when I learned this piece, this Nielsen concerto, for instance, let me put this away. I don't need this. I put this over here now. Okay, this I don't need. This reed is really, I don't know where it came from and why I'm using it. But I will. Here. So when I learned this piece first, which was much too early in my life, the idea, which was not only my idea, but was in general the idea that this is a very difficult piece and we have to nail the technique and we should play things fast and this and that. This was a problem for me because I always have to slow myself down in this piece, and perhaps I'll try to slow myself down now. But what I want to do now is play through the first cadenza, perhaps stopping a little bit to explain what Nielsen perhaps would have wanted. This way. So, as it starts, and the point that we have here, as we have this that place here, and I'm going to go now. I'll come back here because I can. What am I saying? There will be a bit of theatrics, but I first go to the piano with this because as things start here, we have all of a sudden with this passage from here, with a, and then we have here, and then all of a sudden, and then here we have that's this one. And then here. This is all this kind of this way, and here, all throughout this happening, and then here also. Sorry. We have that going, you're here, and we have that happening, which is one of these primary chords, as I was going to say. I have to be louder, right? Yeah, okay, because the microphone's far away. But what this is, it's a kind of section where you don't know what's happening. I don't know. It's like, oh, you're here, and this, and it's like, whoa, I don't know where I am. And oh, what was that? What's happening there? Anyway, and then here, Nielsen, who had the idea that this should be actually quite free, but originally wrote it in a very simple way, then changed things to actually indicate at least a little bit. very funny things are happening now, but I won't talk about what they are exactly. Anyway, yeah, hey, you, no problem. No, that's all. Everything's okay. We don't need- Everything's dropping all over the place. Not as badly as last week, but here. And in that place that I just played, he penciled in quasi rallentando. At first there was nothing in there, so he said, but that's because, of course, there's an implied melody in this, which should get to something which is quite different. And then he says, like Bach. And just like there's an implied melody in the chaconne, we have here an implied melody, which is a bit different, but is important for this piece, which is simply a chromatic. So, and again. And oh, I didn't do something right, but I because I'm going to be out there, and I don't quite have enough room. But maybe you can see this here as we go and we go on again, like Bach. That way, and then moving. And here, he talks about play as many of these as you can. And why is that? That's because we have in the section before this conflict between the F and the E, and here we have the F. This is our home. So this is so. No, you see, I can't play that by itself. Again, play as many as you can, as if, yes, I'm home, but somehow something's not right. And then you wake up. And you remember things. And this piece has a lot to do with memory because things come back, but not in exactly the same form. Just like you remember, but wonder. And it's not, but it is more like wake up and it's like, yes, I sort of remember. Yes, I do remember. And what happens? The piece goes back to the beginning. And this is kind of interesting because it reminds me of Histoire du Soldat of Stravinsky. But there's a big difference between this and that. I put this back here. And go back here. As we start here, and we start in the dominant of F major, which is C major, with the F. And then here, what happens is then we have everything. I hope you can hear me. I'm not sure. But we go back to the beginning, but we are not in the right key. We are in E major, not in F major. So in other words, and then we go on again. So, how is this different from Stravinsky Histoire du Soldat? And again, this is imagination right now, because I don't have information. I don't know if we will ever be able to really know this or not, but there is a possibility that that Nielsen knew this piece of Stravinsky. It is possible. And with Stravinsky, of course, it goes back, so it goes back to the beginning already once and once again. This way. But the difference between that and this is actually very significant, because with the Stravinsky Histoire du Soldat, it goes back, and it's a shortened version, but it's the same. But here, and that's because you have the devil going back, and he's tricking the soldier. So the soldier thinks that everything is the same, in fact. But here, you go back, but it's not the same. So it's like you wake up, and he says, no. There's a kind of disturbance in this. He goes, and perhaps I get my clarinet right now. Here. Okay. And it's the fact that rather than we are here, we are in E major. So things are sort of the same, but somehow not really, and that gives us kind of a feeling of unease. But then something is not right. And then, of course, we start it keeps going with this, and we end up with these kind of cries in the clarinet. Again, in this sort of intermediate key, this way, but with the same, what should I say? creating a dissonance with what is happening in the orchestra all the time. And then it goes on until we have this famous tongued passage here. And that tongued passage, people go, okay, I have to nail this passage. But the question is, what is this passage? And why did Nielsen feel the compulsion to actually write this, which is so, at the time, in a way, so extraordinary? And to look at that, we can see here. Let me see. Am I in the phone? Am I out? Am I in? Am I out? How? Where am I? So. We have this here happening, and then this part which actually recalls, or I should say, it presages what is going to happen later in the piece. But this, I think, moves from this E, which is so predominant, this E right before this, to an insistent on this F, which unfortunately is notated as a G sharp, but for us, but I would have preferred A flat, and that's what I see in my mind when I play this. So anyway, and there we are. It's like, no. What I saw before just now, that's illusion. That's not right. And you have this insistence. And then there, F. That's what it is. And that's why we have this incredibly forceful and dramatic piece, part of this piece, which is generally played in a kind of etc., like that. But I think, and this is again just imagination, that it needs this kind of feeling this way. And the original notation of it, which included here, not this way, and then here, but included that way, which we then understand is in fact a variation of this here in the beginning. With all this augmented whole tone kind of, I should say, mysterious or questioning sense. So we have which is what's happening here, and we so that we got that way again, and we end on the F, and that's like an affirmation that no, this is what it should be, not that. Okay, I think that I did enough about Nielsen now. I could do more. It would be fun because I actually like this piece. But I think this is enough of this. And now I will go to a very different world. It's the world of Max Reger. Max Reger did not live a very long life, as he died of a heart attack in 1916 and was born in 1873. Here, I just want to show this book because this is one of my favorite little books about harmony, in a way. It's called Modulation. That way. And it's very small, as you can see, which is also nice because this is actually right. You don't need this huge tome which repeats things and repeats things. And it is completely devoid of theory. But instead, it just says, if you want to go from C sharp major to something else, let's say D sharp major, how do you do it? And it just shows examples of how to do all of this, which I think was fascinating, very practical, very informative, and very interesting. So once again, this is modulation. This is, I don't believe this was his, it says so here. I read that. It's on the theory of modulation. It's Beiträge zur Modulationslehre, which he published in 1904. This way. So that's very, very useful. So my two favorite books are this and was Thomas Atwood's. Can I find it or do I not find it? See, I lost it again, I think. But no matter. I've had this on the piano for a long time, and I just took it off and put it somewhere that I don't remember now. But that's anyway. Here. Well, anyway, that's what's called, or I call maybe, Mozart's Harmony Book, which again, this was the notebook of Thomas Atwood, and it's very small, very practical, and incredibly useful. So these are my two most influential books on harmony. I may speak later on about my problems with the way harmony and theory is generally taught, but perhaps I won't, or maybe I will, but later, not now. Okay. So, for the clarinet, Reger, of course, is of seminal importance because he wrote 3 clarinet sonatas, he wrote a quintet, and he wrote incidental pieces for clarinet also. So, considering our total repertoire, this is actually very significant. And yet, he's a composer. I've even asked certain students of mine, they will be nameless, but I've asked them, do you know who Max Reger was? And said, huh? They have no idea. Okay, so this is a bit of an introduction to Reger. Now, Reger was, or I should say is, generally considered to be this kind of super intellectual, academic figure in music. And that is a complete misnomer. First of all, he was a big joker. He was a person who was sort of larger than life. He big in all respects. And he was, for a significant portion of his short life, always drunk. And before I go on to actually look at this piece, I will relate a terrible story about him. But one which in a way was very much in character. Okay, now, this had to do with, I believe it was in Weimar, but I'm not exactly sure where it was now. But anyway, he was great virtuoso on the piano and the organ. And this was a piano recital that he was to play in Bamberg. This is exactly what am I talking about? This is this is Max Reger in Bamberg, Germany. Now Bamberg is known for a very special kind of beer, which is called smoked beer. I'm not going to get into that, except it's perhaps an acquired taste, and I acquired that taste very quickly myself. So I sympathize with Reger also. So anyway, Reger had a recital in the evening, and he came in the morning to Bamberg, and he wanted to have a bite to eat, whatever. And again, he was someone who overdid everything. So he went, most likely, I mean, this is for the story, and I don't know if it's exactly true or not, but it's this, again, imagination. Went to this famous pub, in a way, called Schlenkerla, which was known for smoked beer. And it exists now, and it's very popular. I hope that it's done okay in the pandemic. But so he went there and basically kind of disappeared, and it came close to the concert time, and he couldn't be found. And then the manager, or whoever it was from the hall manager, started to look for him. And he thought, well, we'll look in these different pubs. They knew what kind of a character he was. And they found him in Schlenkerla, and here he was, sitting sort of slumped over this thing. So I don't have a real cat, so sort of slumped over, like that, completely dead to the world. Of course, since early in the day, he had ordered this smoked beer. I thought, whoa, this is good. And most likely he ordered this schnapps, hard liquor, also smoked from the thing. And perhaps a Wiener Schnitzel or some kind of dish, which I don't know, whatever. So he would order that, and then he would order another one, probably, and another one, and another one. By the time the concert time came, he was just totally out of it. So they sort of woke him up and sort of, I don't know what, they splashed water on him or had him take a shower. I don't know what it was. But they got him put on the clothes, etc., and had him come out to the stage, to the hall. And this is the part of the story which is most interesting in a kind of terrible way. Okay, so he came out, let's say, here. He walked out and then came to the piano. Let me put this over here. He bowed, sat down. Then he threw up. He vomited all over the piano. I know, this is worse than slime mold, no? Oh, he vomited. Then he got up, he bowed, and he left the stage. So, this is a rather famous story about one of several. But you can see he was not this sort of arch intellectual. He was simply a very talented fellow who had an amazing ear and this overwhelming desire to experience things. We can say from this story, perhaps, he was progenitor, or they could say the grandfather, of what we call now performance art. So that was his performance at that time. But I will go now and to look just a little bit at his A-flat major sonata. This is Opus 49, number 1. He wrote two sonatas, 49, number 1, 49, number 2, and the second in F sharp minor. And then later on, Opus 107, he wrote in B flat minor several years after that. Now, the first thing I should do is compare perhaps with Brahms. And how do I compare that? There is a connection between these sonatas, and this connection, of course, is subtle and sophisticated. And, of course, one connection you can say is that the first sonata of Brahms is in F minor, and this is in A-flat major, that way. So one is the relative minor, one's the major of that. And the second is in F sharp minor. And that's interesting because the structure of Brahms' first sonata has to do, as I mentioned in an early live stream, to do with the tension of two half steps, which has to do here. The D flat, then the G flat. And in the first movement of that, we see this in very stark form because Brahms constructs his form from this tension as the piece moves from F minor to F sharp minor and then back. Yeah. And why am I looking at Brahms now as well is to show the essential difference between Brahms and Reger. Yeah. Okay. Because Brahms, even though he used traditional forms, and Wagner even commented how Brahms used traditional forms in a new way, which actually could invigorate these old forms, as he said. But so the motive in Brahms, in a way, generates form. And we see that very clearly in both sonatas. And so I said, we see in the first sonata how we have this tension between these two half steps. It's there. We see the second sonata also, this sense of not tension, but possibility. It's almost like we have two parallel universes, and in that sonata we have also this half step, these two universes of different half steps, and one was where in E flat, and then we have one motion, of course, which is very traditional, that he puts there. But what is much more important, and I believe that I actually talked about this, so I'm not going to mention particularly much about it, in the E flat sonata, is this movement from here to G major, to B major, and then resolving in E major. So we have this, and he finally does resolve back to E flat. Yeah. Now, Reger, in a way, I say, was much less of an intellectual than Brahms was. And Brahms was never considered to be an intellectual. He was a brilliant composer, kind of his personal life was terrible, and since he came from a lower class, he was not very well-mannered, whatever. But we look at Reger, and what we see in him is that he used form, not like Brahms, in a completely different way, in a certain way more like Schumann did, as a kind of vessel, an amphora, we could say. I don't know, I've been also interested for some reason in ancient Greece recently. But this vessel allowed him to, in sort of way, to throw his ideas and keep a form so that they didn't just sort of splatter all over the place. Now, what does this mean in terms of his music as we look at it? That means that the actual form is not important. But what is important is the moment. And I go back to the book about modulation. No, it's okay. It's okay. We don't need to show it. We showed it a lot. And how he mentions that you go from here to here, you go from here to here. That's that way. And that's what he does here. And he mentioned himself, Reger mentioned, that for him, harmony and melody were the same thing. We can see that in Mozart also. You can see that generally in composers that write, especially like what I call tonal music, because that any melody is defined by its harmonic context. Although with Brahms, you have a very interesting tension often between his melodic writing and what is harmonically underneath it. But with Reger, what you have is a sense of moving here, moving here, moving here, moving here. And what we have to do when we look at Reger, we try to understand, is we have to see the moment and see the interest and the beauty of the moment. So going to this A flat sonata now, maybe I get a clarinet too. Let me find. No, that's an A clarinet. This one. Let's see. Oh God, I don't know if this is going to work at all. This is terrible. Read. I put on. I don't know why I'm obsessed trying my huge collection. I must have a few thousand reeds here, of reeds which at one time I rejected. So I tried them again, only to reject them once again. But it will do, I guess. So we have here. And then, huh? Why didn't it go? No. And then we have. Wow, that's weird. It's sort of okay, but kind of weirdness going on. I want to show you this beginning in here, just so that you can take a look at it. Because for someone who is always drunk, let's say, and of course this is my imagination, so it may not be really true, and I'm sure it's not really true. Here, I don't know if we can, let me see if we can see here, that his markings are incredibly detailed and actually incredibly accurate in a way, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And here's piano, then pianissimo is here. We have here piano, we have mezzo piano after this. Moving on, then down, then goes up to forte, then all of a sudden piano. Here, you see. One thing I should mention to everybody, or at least the clarinet players who are listening to this, watching this, is that the clarinet parts are not actually as correctly detailed as the piano scores are. I'm sure that Reger did not look at the clarinet parts themselves, but actually wrote the score himself. You know, I don't know of any clarinet part that he actually wrote out. I could be wrong, but anyway, they are I should say they have problems because of spacing issues, etc., etc. So often the dynamics, and we see this in many pieces, not only in Reger, in clarinet parts, we see that the dynamics, the hairpins, are often in slightly or even worse than slightly positions, which are not correct. So you should always look at the score itself and then figure out how to correct your own clarinet parts. Okay, so that's that. But we move back here. I just do the very opening of this. And Reger's piano writing is very pianistic, but incredibly florid, generally. So it's something that I won't really attempt to play, except the very opening in slow motion. Now, first I will play it, and then go through it and play it once again. So we have this. So we have here. Then we have. Then here. Then here. So basically what he's doing is simply going from A flat to D flat. Can you see it's okay? Yeah. And if we look how he's doing this, though. We can see that he has the shapes that he creates differences of color. So we start here, and then we have this here. Are you okay? Then this has, and it's, so here we're going from here, we're going just from the A flat. Yeah. Oh, then, so it's kind of just mysterious. And then, to F minor. This, and then we start from there a sequence. This is a, and then so it's interesting here that he has two things happening here in this part, which is one, he is going from A flat to D flat, and the other one, he is going from G to D. That way, you see. Then his dynamic mark moves up, so then we have you see. So this marking here, similar to what Brahms would have done, actually has a sense of time. This is what I mean when I say you want to concentrate on the moment. Yeah. And he's going, and then we go on, then back to here, then here, and then we go from here, we were in D to B major. Ooh, I see. So, I think I overstayed my welcome. I was going to play performance I gave, but I think we will do that next week. Yeah. So I will continue with Rager. See, I got carried away with everything. I'm so sorry. I apologized again. I think I need to have some kind of electroshock so that every time I start to say, and I go like that, and I don't. Okay, anyway. So, for all of you who actually stayed with me, I appreciate that. And be well, everyone. Be careful, even though things are opening up. That's one thing I didn't talk about, but the discrepancy even in the United States between areas where there is a lot of vaccination and the areas which there has not been a lot is very extreme in terms of numbers of infections. So, no matter what, be careful. And I guess till next week, which will probably seem like just tomorrow. And with that, I think there will be more Rager. And I will will do this in a different way, more performance and less talk. Okay. Take care, everyone.